let's get started on part 2 of module 2. In this section, we will do an overview of ESXi hosts, and we will look at vSphere user interfaces. Let's start out with an overview of ESXi hosts. What is an ESXi host? An ESXi host is a big computer with a lot of processors, and running on an ESXi host are virtual machines. A small data center might only have 1 or 2 ESXi hosts, and a large data center might have hundreds of ESXi hosts. Let's look at ESXi host configuration. To perform ESXi host configuration, it can be done either locally while standing at the ESXi host or remotely from your workstation in your office. Let's start out with local ESXi host configuration. When we say local ESXi host configuration, it means you have to go into the server room and you walk up to the ESXi host and you use something called the Direct Console User Interface to configure that host. In this example, what we will do is simply configure an IP address on the ESXi host. This is the screen for the ESXi host, and to make configuration changes, we press F2 on the bottom left of the screen. We type in the administrator's password, which is root. Then we type in the administrator name, which is root. Then we type in the password and hit the enter key. Then we select configure network management, and then we select IP4 configuration, and this is where we can assign an IP address. We type in the IP address, the subnet mask, and the default gateway, just like we were configuring TCP/IP on a Windows server, and we press enter. Then we press escape. Do you want the changes to apply? Yes, and now we can see we have assigned an IP address to our ESXi host. This is configuring the ESXi host while standing at the ESXi host. Now, frequently you don't want to have to walk into the server room every time you configure the ESXi host. This is why we use the vSphere desktop client. The vSphere desktop client allows us to configure ESXi hosts remotely. The vSphere desktop client is installed on your workstation and allows you to remotely connect to ESXi hosts to create virtual machines. To connect to an ESXi host using the vSphere desktop client, you click on the VMware vSphere client, then type in the IP address of the host you want to connect to, type in the administrator name, which is root, followed by the password, then you click on log on. And now we are connected to an ESXi host, and we can see that a host is a computer which uses virtualization software such as ESXi to run virtual machines. If we click on the Summary tab, we can see that this ESXi host has 4 Xeon processors and 32 gig of RAM. If we select the Virtual Machines tab, we can see there are currently 3 virtual machines running on this ESXi host. The Resource Allocation tab allows us to allocate different amounts of resources to different virtual machines. If we select the Performance tab, we can see that this ESXi host is not working hard at all. If we click on the Configuration tab, we can look at the health status, we can look at the processors, and we can look at memory. Under local users and groups, you usually use the account called root as the administrator, but you can add additional users and make them administrators. The Events tab shows any error messages which may have occurred on your host, and the Permissions tab allows you to assign different users different levels of access to different virtual machines. Let's look at some common configuration tasks that you might do on an ESXi host, such as licensing, time and date, host name and DNS suffix. So I connect to my ESXi host. I click on the Configuration tab, then I click on Licensed Features, and then I click on Edit. You can see I am currently installed with no license key. So you can install without a license key, and it's good for 60 days. But to go beyond 60 days, you have to enter the license key. So then we type in the license key, and then we click on OK. And then to configure the time configuration, we select time, followed by properties, and then we can type in the time and the date. Under DNS and routing, we select properties, and the default name of this ESXi host is simply localhost. Well, that's not a very descriptive name, so let's give it a better name, such as ESXi6. And then I can add the domain name, such as ccbcmd.edu, and we type in the IP address of the DNS server, and under the routing tab, we type in the IP address of the default gateway. The vSphere desktop client allows us to remotely configure ESXi hosts while standing at our workstation in our office. Now let's look at the vSphere web client. Let's say you're at a Starbucks having a cup of coffee, surfing the internet, and you get a phone call from work, and they tell you, we need you to come in to create a virtual machine or delete a virtual machine, and you say, well, I don't want to drive all the way into work. Well, what you can do is use the vSphere web client to connect over the internet to your data center and connect to your vCenter server, and then you can configure the virtual machines. So let's do that. To connect remotely over the internet, I select my browser, and then I type in the URL, in this case vcenter.ccbcmd.edu, and this connects me to my vCenter server. I type in my username, which for vCenter is administrator at vsphere.local. I type in the password, I log in, and now I am connected to Data Center 1, and I'm looking, and I see I have 3 ESXi hosts. If I click on the first ESXi host and I look at the Summary tab, I can see that this is a Dell rack mount server, and it has 24 logical Xeon processors. It has 256 gig of RAM, and it has a 2 terabyte hard disk. If I click on the Monitor tab, I can see how hard this ESXi host is working, and we can see it's running at about 50 to 60%. If I select the Hardware Status tab, I can see there are no problems with the hardware. If I select the Manage tab, I can see the virtual machines which are running on this ESXi host, and I can stop or start or create or delete a virtual machine. The vSphere web client allows us to manage virtual machines over the internet. Installation of the vSphere web client is covered in Chapter 12. Everybody knows what the graphical user interface is, and it's much easier to use, but frequently we use the command line to configure our ESXi hosts. The vSphere CLI command line interface is a group of commands used to manage a vCenter server. There are 3 products that allow us to manage the ESXi host in the command prompt. You can go to the ESXi host, log on to the console, and issue command line commands from the console. You can use the Virtual Management Assistant, which is installed on a Linux client, or you could install Power CLI, which is a PowerShell add-on, which is installed on a Windows workstation. And then what you can do is that you can then manage the ESXi host using a command prompt. So we can see there are 4 methods of configuring ESXi hosts. You can go up to the ESXi host and use the direct console user interface. You can use the vSphere desktop client from your office. You can use the vSphere web client if you're at a Starbucks and want to connect over the internet, or you can use a command prompt. Let's look at some of the different editions of vSphere Standard, Enterprise, and Enterprise Plus. And if we go to VMware.com, we see a comparison of Standard, Enterprise, and Enterprise Plus. And you can see that Standard, just like the others, includes the hypervisor, it includes vMotion, storage vMotion, high availability, data protection, and fault tolerance, all of which we will discuss during this class. If we look at Enterprise and scroll down, we see that Enterprise supports several features not offered by Standard, notably DRS, the Distributed Resource Scheduler, which performs load balancing. And then if we go to Enterprise Plus and scroll down, we can see that Enterprise Plus offers features not in Enterprise, such as the distributed switch, host profiles, and auto deploy. Now they also have what's called the vSphere Essentials kits, but this is only for very small businesses with a maximum of 3 physical servers. The Essentials kit just provides the hypervisor, and the Essentials Plus provides the hypervisor, vMotion, and storage vMotion. Essentials kit only for very small businesses. Now, if we look at the prices, we can see that vSphere Standard Edition is about $1,000. Enterprise Edition is $3,400 per CPU. Here at the Community College of Baltimore County, we have spent $70,000 on VMware licenses alone. And of course, you can download a free copy of VMware. They want you to download a free copy, so you will like it and then come back and buy it. And really, when you buy it, you're just buying the license key to make it work. In summary, in this section, we discussed what is virtualization, why use virtualization, and what are the components of the software-defined data center. We looked at vSphere, at ESXi hosts, and at virtual machines. We looked at storage area networks, at virtual disks and VMFS data stores. We looked at virtual switches, and we saw that there are 4 methods of configuring the ESXi host: direct console user interface, the desktop client, the vSphere web client, and the command line interface. And lastly, we discussed the different editions of vSphere. And this concludes Module 2. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.